Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I didn't expect to see my name on the guest list for Sofia Alvarez's promotion dinner. For 2 years, she had treated me like a piece of furniture my son refused to haul to the curb, present, inconvenient, unfashionable. The invitation arrived as a text bubble at noon on a Thursday. Ethan insists you should come since he's in Zurich for 2 weeks. Friday, 8 p.m. at Marceline. Cocktail attire, no greeting, no call, just a directive as if I were a temporary employee learning the dress code. I looked up from the medical journal I'd been annotating a futile habit for a retired neurosurgeon and caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back, Dr. Caroline Hayes, 60 widow. Steady hands that no longer held a scalpel could manage an evening of small talk. There had been years of charity galas when my late husband Michael still teased that my tolerance for donor schmoozing outstripped my patience for hospital politics. I placed my phone on the closed journal and exhaled. If Ethan wanted me there, I would go. He called from his hotel a few hours later, the sound of elevators chiming at intervals. "Mom, you got the invite?" "I did," I said. "Marceline, 8 o'clock. I'll be there." He hesitated. "You don't have to do this." "Of course I do," I answered lightly. "You'll be across an ocean. It costs me nothing to eat dinner." "Text me when you're home," he said, softening. "Please." After we hung up, I opened the wardrobe I rarely bothered with. Now, fitted black dress, low heels, I could stand in for hours, a single rope of pearls. I clipped my hair into a clean twist, the way I had for early surgeries. "Keep everything off your face," I could hear my first attending bark. In the mirror, the pearls caught the last of the afternoon light. I chose not to drive. Call it instinct or simple convenience, but I ordered a car and slid a shawl into my bag. Marceline was one of those new places where the lighting was designed to flatter and the wine list could audition as literature. The car left me at a brass-framed entrance that opened onto dark wood and a gleam of glassware. At the center of a long table, Sophia was unmistakable, scarlet dress hair lacquered into luminous waves, her confidence staged like a storefront. The instant she spotted me, something taut passed over her expression, then dissolved into a practiced smile. "Dr. Hayes," she sang out, raising with her arms half extended as though to hug a statue. "Everyone, this is Ethan's mother. Not Caroline, not even my future mother-in-law. A role, not a person." I murmured greetings as she moved around the table, matching names to faces that would evaporate by morning. 2 colleagues from her firm, a friend with a podcast voice, parents flown in from Miami, and, at the far end, a gray-templed man introduced as Victor Lang, our CEO. He shook my hand with a brief, decisive warmth that told me he noticed more than he said. A chair waited between Sophia's mother and the friend with the soft, focused laugh, an afterthought position, the social equivalent of the aisle seat near the kitchen doors. I thanked the server for water, then congratulated Sophia. "Ethan told me your new portfolio involves Latin America. That's a significant vote of confidence." "It is," she replied, already turning to her right. "He should have been here." "He's presenting flight control work in Zurich," I said evenly. "He'll call you after the test runs." Her smile was thin. "We'll see." Menus appeared. Candles were coaxed higher by a gloved hand. Conversation rose and fell, a room full of people performing accomplishment for one another. I spoke with her mother, who was courteous and slightly adrift, the way parents become when their children inhabit industries that didn't exist when they immigrated. I learned that Sophia once dissected frogs in middle school and fainted. I learned that Victor preferred a Bordeaux with muscle. I learned to ignore the brittle scrape of Sophia's bracelets when she gestured as though conducting her own applause. The first cut came over the oysters. Sophia was telling a story about a recalcitrant client when she swerved mid-sentence, switched to Spanish, and said, eyes flicking toward me, voice honeyed for everyone else, "Tengo que aguantar a esta vaca toda la noche." I have to put up with this cow all night. A small ripple of nervous laughter traveled the table like static. Her parents exchanged a look. Her friend ducked toward her napkin. Victor's attention seemed pinned to his plate, though I couldn't tell whether he'd heard every word or nothing at all. I set my fork down and reached for water. I had learned the habit of neutral hands long before I learned any conjugation. The second cut landed with the halibut. "Suvo," she said in Spanish, making a tiny face. "Es como un chihuahua chilón." Her voice is like a squeaky chihuahua. The friend with the podcast laugh obeyed the script, laughing softly. Sophia warmed to her own material, slipping back into English for the broad strokes, then into Spanish for the thin blades, my hair, my dress, my old-world pearls. I watched the choreography repeat, the language switch, the sideways glance, the relieved giggle from her corner, the stillness growing in the older faces at the table. I didn't defend my hair or my pearls or myself. For 3 decades, I had told families that the tumor was worse than we'd hoped, that we would do everything, that we could not guarantee tomorrow. The face you use for grief is the face you use for cruelty, composed human unfed by spectacle. By dessert, the patter had become a running commentary that even the servers could feel. A lemon tart arrived shining like lacquer, and Sofia declared in Spanish, "La meteré en un asilo en cuanto pueda." Ethan necesita cortar el cordón. I'll put her in a home as soon as I can. Ethan needs to cut the cord. Silence at last built its own room. I lifted my napkin, folded it, and placed it to the left of the plate. For a half-breath, I considered doing nothing at all, leaving as quietly as I had come, ordering a car and letting the night finish itself. But education serves you best when you least expect it to. I stood. Sofia de Merced in Spanish, not loudly, not theatrically, simply correctly the way you insert a shunt. Heads turned with the soft concerted motion people make when something not on the menu appears. Gracias por incluirme esta noche. Thank you for including me this evening. Es curioso lo de la vaca. En muchos países es símbolo de sustento y fortaleza. It's curious about the cow. In many countries, it's a symbol of sustenance and strength. Her lipstick seemed suddenly too bright for her skin. Her mother's hand rose to her mouth and stayed there. The friend stared at me as if subtitles had materialized mid-air. I switched to French without raising my voice. Quant aux petits chiens, on dit qu'ils sont d'une loyauté féroce et qu'ils vivent tranquillement longtemps. Deux qualités utiles, surtout en famille. As for the small dog, people say they're fiercely loyal and long-lived. 2 useful qualities, especially in families. The room made a new kind of silence. I could feel Victor's attention settle like a weight across the table. I turned a final time to Italian clean-measured vowels that startled the candlelight into steadier focus. Il carattere di una persona si vede non quando è circondata da ammiratori, ma quando crede di poter umiliare senza conseguenze. A person's character is revealed not when surrounded by admirers, but when she believes she can belittle without consequences. I ended as I had begun in English. Congratulations on your promotion, Sofia. Your firm must be proud. I rested my palm lightly on the table, not to steady myself, but to release the impulse to say more. It is a skill to stop cutting when you have reached the healthy margin. Someone cleared a throat. A server pretended to adjust a candle that did not need adjustment. Sofia's father inspected a place on his napkin that had no stain. The friend with the podcast voice had run out of laughter. Behind Sofia's glassy poise, I could see the math she was doing, who understood what, how much, how long. Victor met my eye with a small nod, unreadable in executive acknowledgement without choosing a side. It felt less like approval than like record-keeping. I gathered my shawl, thanked the server nearest me, and stepped away from the table with the ease of a person leaving an operating theater after the incision is closed. The host took 2 quick steps to open the door. Outside, the air had that cool, clean edge you get on a city street when a front moves through New York, scrubbing its own face. The car pulled up before I finished tying the knot of my shawl. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror and asked, "Oh, good night, ma'am." Quiet, I said, which was true in the ways that matter. We turned onto 9th Avenue. I took out my phone and typed a brief message to Ethan home soon. Dinner was instructive. I stopped before adding anything else. Some facts belong to the person who needs them most. I tucked the phone back into my bag and watched the city rearrange itself through the window brick, the neon, then the soft black seam where the river cut the lights in two. My shoulders, I realized, had dropped a fraction. Pearls against the collarbone, the precise weight of their cool. When the car stopped in front of my building, I tipped the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk. The doorman lifted a hand. The lobby's marble echoed faintly under my heels. In the elevator, I saw my reflection again, a woman still and alert like a room waiting to be used for its proper purpose. I touched the pearls once, not for luck, only to confirm what I already knew. They were real, they were mine, they were not loud. Upstairs, I turned on the kitchen light and poured water, the ordinary kind of ceremony that steadies the hands. The night lay quiet past the window, and the city faithful, various, impossible to embarrass, kept breathing without comment. The apartment kept its own silence the next morning, the kind that arrives after you have said exactly enough. I washed the pearls one bead at a time with a soft cloth and placed them back in their case as if returning instruments to a tray. The kettle clicked off. Outside, a truck reversed and the city reassembled itself from steam and brakes. I didn't call Ethan. I sent a single line, "Home safe." "Zurich, go well." He replied with a photo of a whiteboard filled with equations and a thumbs up drawn in blue marker by someone off camera. We traded banalities about weather and sleep schedules. I left the night untouched. On the 4th day after the dinner, my doorbell rang at 10 in the morning. I expected a parcel and found instead a man with gray at his temples and an umbrella folded with more care than most people give to contracts. "Dr. Hayes," he asked. "I'm Victor Lang. Do you have a moment?" He stood with the patience of someone used to being admitted, not entitled to it. I stepped aside. "Coffee," I asked. "Black?" he said, then corrected himself with a small smile. "Please." He took in the room without moving around it, framed photographs from old medical missions, Michael's first edition poetry tucked between atlases, a wooden mask one of my residents had brought me from Sierra Leone. On the sideboard sat a picture of Ethan in a marching band uniform, trumpet crooked like an extra limb. Victor glanced at it, then looked away as if acknowledging a person and not a prop. "I wanted to thank you for the economy of your intervention at dinner," he said when we were seated. "You closed a wound without opening a second. I spoke the languages I know I said. That isn't what I meant." He warmed his palms on the coffee mug. "We're moving aggressively in Southern Europe and Latin America. Our teams speak English, of course, but that isn't the same as knowing how a room works. You seem to understand a room." I didn't answer. It is sometimes useful to let a silence do the measuring. "We're assembling a small bench of external advisors," he continued, "people who can travel when needed, sit in meetings where the temperature is high and translate not words but stakes. Part-time, discreet, compensated accordingly." He set a card down as if it might startle me if he slid it across. "If that appeals, I'd like to talk specifics." I considered the card without touching it. "I'm retired from surgery," I said. "My time belongs to a community clinic in the South Bronx 3 mornings a week. I'm not looking for another identity." "I don't think you are," he said. "You already have one." He sipped and looked past me to the window. "Last week in São Paulo, a negotiation collapsed over a joke that wasn't funny in Portuguese. Our people smiled and missed the insult." He returned his gaze. "I'd like fewer missed insults. It would have been simple to hedge to ask for materials to look impressed for his sake. Instead, I told him the truth. I won't commit today. I'm not a consultant by training. I would need to understand the shape of the work and whether I can do it without giving up what I value." His expression didn't shift into persuasion. "Fair. Take your time." He set the cup down and stood. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about Friday. Professional performances make people forget they still owe each other basic discipline." He left the card on the entry table and was gone by the time the elevator chimed. That afternoon, a message arrived from a name I hadn't seen in a while, Noah Green. He and Ethan had shared a dorm room sophomore year in a penchant for arguing about jet engines over pizza. "Dr. H, can I stop by?" he wrote. "It's important." Noah showed up rain-soaked and sheepish hair flattened into curls he kept pushing off his forehead. He paced my kitchen like a student studying for a practical exam. "I wasn't at Marceline," he said, placing both hands on the counter as if to stop himself from moving, "but half of Sophia's circle was. They've been calling around to make sure Ethan never hears what happened." I took 2 mugs from the shelf and waited for the kettle. "What did you hear?" I asked. He told me enough to show he had the story, not the gossip, the switch into Spanish, the words she chose the way I answered when I was done being polite. He looked at me as if testing whether the person in front of him matched the one from the retelling. "I'm telling Ethan when he gets back," he said. "He's my friend. He needs the ground under him to be real." I passed him a towel for his jacket. "I won't ask you not to." He swallowed, relieved. "If you had a reason, I would listen." He hesitated. "I've never seen anyone handle humiliation like that before." "It's just grammar," I said, "and timing." He laughed at that, a strangled sound he tried to turn into a cough. He didn't stay for soup. At the door, he adjusted his umbrella, all earnestness and loyalty. "He lands Saturday night," he said. "We have a game Sunday. I'll talk to him then." The apartment felt larger after he left, as if his urgency had taken up space. I stood at the sink and let the water run too cold, then turned it off and dried my hands on a dish towel Michael once insisted we buy in Verona because the linen was the proper weight for living. Around 3, a courier delivered a donation receipt from a foundation I hadn't heard of, a sum directed to the clinic. There was a short note clipped to the top in an immaculate hand for your Thursdays. V.L. Ethan's text arrived a day later. "Boarding. See you late. I made chicken with lemon and thyme because it reheats without complaint." He hugged me at the door in the wool coat I'd considered hiding when he was 16 to force him into something warmer. He ate, showered, and fell asleep while telling me a story about an engineer from Delft who had solved a flutter problem with a pencil and a paperclip. In the brightness of Sunday morning, he laced his sneakers, grabbed a gym bag, and said, "Back by noon." He kissed my head on his way out the way Michael used to when hospital rounds wouldn't wait. I set the table for lunch, roasted carrots, a salad, slices of bread in a towel-lined bowl, and told myself I wasn't doing it for anyone but my son. At 11:45, I heard his key, quick and decisive, then the door closing harder than he meant. He stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his basketball clothes, his mouth set the color high on his cheekbones. "Mom," he said, I need you to tell me the truth. I didn't pretend not to know the category of truth he wanted. I gestured to a stool. He didn't sit. At Sophia's dinner, he said, "Did she make comments about you in Spanish because she thought you wouldn't understand?" "Yes," I said. "And did you respond in Spanish and French and Italian so everyone knew you'd understood?" "Yes." He dragged a hand through his hair. For a second, Michael stood in my kitchen again, all angles and grief and generosity. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan asked. "Because you were working and I didn't want to become the subject of your trip," I said. "Because she said those things to me, not to you, because I don't triangulate." "She called you a cow," he said, the word a bitter thing in his mouth. "Said your voice was a chihuahua. Told her friends she'd put you in a home as soon as possible so I could finally cut the cord." He stared at the counter as if it had given him the lines to read. "And you sat there. And then you stood up and finished it with a scalpel." I touched his sleeve. "I finished dinner," I said. His laugh had no humor in it. "Noah told me." He said half the table wants to pretend it never happened, and the other half is pretending they didn't understand. He also said Victor Lang looked like he'd swallowed a paperclip. He exhaled. "He came to see you, didn't he?" "He did," I said. "He asked if I would consider advising his team on international work." "Will you?" "I haven't decided." We heard a car stop outside a door, close heels on concrete. Ethan's face did something small and private. "She's here," he said. "I need to talk to her." "I'll go for a walk," I told him. "Take whatever time you need." I took my keys, my phone, and nothing else. The elevator doors slid open on the lobby with a whisper. I crossed paths with Sophia in the vestibule. She was carrying a bouquet that had been designed by a person who understood angles not sent. Her eyes flicked over me, then away, as if I were a detail in a painting. I walked along the river for an hour, letting the wind take my hair out of its sensible twist. Dogs pulled their owners toward the water. A man taught a little girl how to skip stones and celebrated each two-skip success as if it were a championship. When my phone buzzed, Ethan's message was as spare as mine had been days earlier. "She's gone." He was in the living room when I returned, elbows on knees, staring at a photograph of the three of us taken the day he graduated. He didn't look up until I sat. "I ended it," he said. I nodded. "There are moments when a mother's face should be spare." "Did she deny it?" I asked. "At first," he said. "Then she said it was a joke. Then she cried. Then she told me you've manipulated me my whole life, that you humiliated her on purpose." He smiled without any softness. Then she said she would call me when I was thinking clearly again. The room allowed that to sit for a while. The clock on the mantel ticked as if demonstrating that time is built from ordinary mechanics. I told her, he said finally, that I can't marry someone who mistakes cruelty for humor, or who lies to me when she's caught, or who talks about you like a problem to be solved. I reached for his hand and found it. The skin across his knuckles was nicked from a game played too hard. "You didn't need my permission," I said. "I know." He squeezed once and let go. "Noah also said Victor visited. Did he offer you a job because of what he saw?" "Because of what he saw, and because of what he needs," I said. "Those are not always the same thing." Ethan leaned back. He seemed both older and more like the boy who once disassembled a tape recorder on my kitchen floor just to see how the sound got in. "I didn't know you spoke 3 languages like that," he said. "4, I corrected. "My German limps, but it gets where it's going." How did I miss that about my own mother? "You were busy becoming who you are." A faint line appeared between his brows. "I keep trying to figure out why she chose me," he said. Then shook his head at himself. "That's not useful." I stood. "There's lunch," I said. "You should eat something." We ate at the table I had set for a different afternoon. He told me about Zurich in bursts, between bites, the prototype, the simulation lab, the Swiss coffee that offended him on principle. I listened the way I had learned to listen to interns after a night on call, for signs that would tell me whether to sit them down or send them home. When the plates were empty, he collected them without thinking, rinsed and stacked them neatly in the rack. He dried his hands and looked at the counter as if the right words might be set out there like utensils. "I'm not angry at you," he said. "I'm angry I didn't see her clearly sooner." "Seeing clearly is an act, not a gift," I said, and left it at that. He picked up the bouquet Sophia had left, white lilies and eucalyptus, and looked around the room as if searching for a vase, then carried them to the trash, paused, and instead laid them on the hallway table. "They smell like a waiting room," he said, which made both of us laugh briefly and well. Later, when he changed into a clean shirt and his breathing no longer held the ragged edge of the game, he asked, "What did Victor want exactly?" I explained the outline as simply as I could, a bench of people who knew how to hear the sentence beneath the sentence, occasional travel, work that existed in the space between language and leverage. Ethan listened with the intensity he usually saved for machines. "Could you do it and keep the clinic?" he asked. "If the terms are honest," I said. He nodded, not as approval, but as data stored. The afternoon light had begun to move across the bookshelves in a narrow, pale band. He checked his phone, saw nothing he needed to answer, and set it face down. I'm going to call Noah, he said. Then I'm going to sleep. He hugged me the way he had when he was 10 and had broken a model airplane and didn't yet know how to apologize for being angry at the glue. I'm sorry, he said into my shoulder. He didn't specify for what, and I didn't require him to. After he closed his bedroom door, I collected plates and glasses and the linen napkin he'd folded into an approximation of a triangle. In the quiet, I picked up Victor's card from the entry table and turned it over. The address was embossed the way a hospital letterhead announces the seriousness of its work. I placed it in the drawer with the spare keys and the tape measure, ordinary tools that occasionally become essential. The apartment settled again the way a body does when a fever breaks, not healed, but cooler, the sheets no longer damp. Outside, the river kept its appointment with the tide, and the city made room for whatever evening people needed. I filled a pot for tomorrow's soup and left it in the fridge, lid balanced, but not close the metal, a muted circle of light under the kitchen bulb. Ethan slept like the dead and woke lighter. By midweek, the story of his broken engagement had moved through his circle the way weather does, felt discussed, then replaced by other conditions. I kept my hours at the clinic translating fear into explanation in a fluorescent room where the ceiling tiles didn't line up. On Thursday afternoon, while I was showing a grandmother from Oaxaca how to draw a clock for her neurologist, a message from Victor arrived. Would you have time tomorrow for specifics? I wrote back. Noon. He came with a folder and the same umbrella edges aligned like good sutures. We sat at my kitchen table. We can keep this simple, he said, opening the folder to a 2-page outline. A retainer for access. Scope limited to cross-border work. Travel only by mutual agreement. We'll ask for availability windows. You'll give us yes or no, clinic mornings protected. You read minds, I said. I read calendars, he said, and the room at Marceline. We discussed conflict walls, confidentiality, and the small truth that translation is often a disguised form of power. When we were done, he slid a pen across the table. I signed and felt nothing ceremonial, which is the right way to feel when adding work you know how to do. He stood, shook my hand, and said, Welcome, Dr. Hayes. At the door, he hesitated. One more item separate from yours. I've been following your son's work. We're building an aerospace initiative. It needs a head. You have one. I have a seat, he said. I'm looking for the person who will give it a spine. He asked whether Ethan would take a call. I told him to ask Ethan, not me. That evening, in the soft stutter of the landline we never replaced, Ethan listened to a stranger describe the work he had been drawing in notebooks since he was 13. After he hung up, he came to the kitchen and poured himself water as if it were harder than scotch. Chicago, he said. He wants me in Chicago. He wants the work in Chicago, I said. He nodded. I said I'd meet the team. I didn't say yes. You didn't say no, I said. He sat on the radiator the way he had as a boy, legs too long now for the old geometry. If I go, he said, I don't want to go because I'm running from anything. I haven't asked you to run, I said. He looked at me then with the open attention he saves for test pilots and old friends. I know. Chicago medicine late light and the wind the lake reserves for the unprepared. Victor didn't collect us at the terminal with a car that said too much. He left instructions for a driver to say nothing, which is rarer. The company's headquarters occupied a high slice of a building that looked like a glacier someone had taught to square dance. The morning underlined what the call had suggested. Ethan vanished into rooms that used words, flutter, boundary layer, composite layup with the intensity of weather reports. He reappeared over lunch with a set to his mouth that meant the mental machines were running clean. In the afternoon, they put him in a simulation lab and asked him to break things for an hour. He returned with his hair refusing to lie down and the faint, boyish grin I had last seen when he derived lift on a napkin. My schedule was padded differently. Victor's chief of international relations was a woman named Helena Costa, with a pen that made a faint scratching sound even on glass. We're clumsy in the ways everyone is clumsy, she said without preface, as we walked past glass walls into a quieter room. We bring the same slides to Madrid and Marseille and pretend we're listening when we're waiting to present. Tell me what you saw at dinner. An avoidable error in temperature, I said, and a room calibrated to look away. She smiled quick. Good. Now, Sao Paulo. She laid out a case. I asked questions, wrote nothing down, and gave back a sequence of steps that would lower the voice of their pitch by 3 degrees. She wrote yes in the margins in a language I didn't recognize and closed the notebook. I can work with you. They had also arranged for me to visit a clinic on the south side that had better equipment than any free clinic I had ever seen and the same scarcity of time as all of them. A woman in triage introduced me to the medical director, a calm internist named Dr. Patel, who wore a cardigan like a uniform. You're fluent, I hear, she said, which could be an invitation or a test. She handed me a chart for a man from Côte d'Ivoire with episodic vertigo and a fear of imaging machines. We sat together for 20 minutes. I spoke French that had learned its verbs in a tent hospital. He told me about a wharf in Abidjan where the light makes a flat blue. he cannot find in Chicago. We emerged with a plan for slow MRI, an antiemetic, and an orange he found in his pocket and pressed into my hand as if he were paying me. That evening, in the kind of hotel suite designed to reconcile the word executive with the word carpet, Ethan and I compared notes the old way out loud, without screens. The prototype in their lab, he said, and crossed to the window as if proximity to height improved recall. They're modeling yaw dampers with a fidelity I've only seen at Delft. Their composite team is, Mom, I've never seen a stack like that outside a research institute. The clinic had rugs, I said, nice ones. Patients showed up on time. He laughed, drained of irony. Then he sobered. If this becomes real, he said, I don't want you to feel displaced. I have a passport, I said, and a subway card. Displacement is a choice. He took that and turned it like a piece of balsa and put it down. The next day was more of the same by design. People were introduced, rooms performed themselves. Ethan answered questions with diagrams sketched upside down so other people could read them. In the afternoon, Helena asked if I would sit in on a call with a team in Barcelona. They say they're ready for a site visit, she said. They are not ready. On the call, their lead, a Catalan engineer with a precise jawline and imprecise English, insisted they could host negotiations in 2 weeks. I asked 3 questions in Spanish, one about supplier timelines, one about language support, one about a zoning change buried in the news 2 months ago. By the time I finished the third, he had moved his date back by 3 weeks, all by himself. When we hung up, Helena's pen made that faint, satisfied scratch. You don't say no, she said. You say how. We flew back to New York with less to talk about and more to think through. In the weeks that followed, the practicalities declared themselves. Ethan resigned from his firm with a letter that didn't mention names. He told friends what he could and ignored speculation. Victor's team sent a contract that read like a technical document, tight spare missing adjectives, and Ethan signed. I looked for an apartment near a train line and found one with morning light that pooled on the kitchen floor like warm milk. We shipped boxes, gave away furniture, and kept the piano out of sentiment and in defiance of square footage. In Chicago, the wind moved along the lake with a consistency that I liked. I learned the sound the elevator made at our new buildings. Ethan learned the names of the security guards at his. Work arranged itself around us as work does when it's the right size. 3 mornings a week, the clinic put me in rooms with worry I could use my hands on. 2 afternoons a week, Helena's team put me in rooms where the temperature needed managing. Once in the elevator, a young engineer I didn't know thanked me for a phrasing I'd offered a week earlier that had prevented a conversation from breaking in half. 2 months in, Victor asked if I would travel to Paris for a set of investor meetings. Spain, Italy, France, he said in my office, where the view was a brick wall I had come to prefer. We'll be discussing the manufacturing backbone for the aerospace initiative. Ethan will need to present technical detail. We'll need the room to survive it. Travel happens to surgeons the way emergencies happen to everyone else. You accept the timing or you don't go. I accepted. Ethan flew in from a conference in Munich. I flew from O'Hare with a notebook and a shawl that had learned to be useful in over-conditioned rooms. In the small conference floor of their Paris office, the carpet muffled ambition. The windows looked toward a courtyard where someone had arranged hydrangeas to make a point I didn't know how to read. Victor greeted us with the efficiency of a man who had chosen his breakfast for its lack of crumbs. Around the table sat the people who would decide whether the machines Ethan loved would get to exist in air. 2 investors from Milan with leather portfolios that had aged well. A French partner with a banker's tie and a farmer's hands, and standing at the refreshment table with her back to us, a woman speaking Spanish into a phone without apology. She turned, replacing the phone with a stillness that had been trained into her posture, not her face. I recognized her from Marceline without expecting to Sophia's mother. She crossed to Victor with a smile I had not seen at the dinner one that reached what it needed to reach. Angela Victor said, "This is Claudia Romero, CEO of Iber Aero, Claudia Dr. Caroline Hayes, and Ethan Hayes, who will be leading our aerospace division." Claudia's eyes did a tiny calculation and arrived at neutral. She offered her hand first to me, then to Ethan. "Un placer," she said, her Spanish Castilian and clean. "Nos vimos de lejos en Nueva York. We saw each other from a distance in New York." "De muy cerca," I replied, the words quiet, from very close. We sat. Introductions wore their formal clothes and then took them off. The first hour was scaffolding slides numbers, the modern theater of competence. When the technical section began, Ethan stood and spoke the language he had taught himself with models, then equations, then nights at a board. He explained the stress behavior of composite layups under thermal cycling. He explained why their proposed yaw damper algorithm would tolerate turbulence like a good horse tolerates wind. He did not pretend anyone at the table was stupid, which is harder than it sounds. Questions came in English at first, then drifted into French and Italian. I didn't translate every word, only the words with heat on them, only the places where pride disguised itself as inquiry. When the Italian investor demanded assurances no engineer could give, Ethan started to answer with the careful humility that makes sense in labs. I shifted a phrase half a degree into certainty without lying. He caught me doing it and adjusted his next sentence accordingly. At the break, Claudia found me at the window where the hydrangeas admitted nothing. She spoke in Spanish again lower. Debí decir algo aquella noche, she said. I should have said something that night. I let the air between us honor that sentence. No todos los escenarios son para la familia, I said. Not every stage is for family. She is my daughter, she said, and there was nothing in the voice that asked for absolution. She thinks intelligence excuses everything. You and I know it never does. We know different things, I said. She glanced toward Ethan, who was showing the banker farmer where on a diagram error can hide. CHIHUAHUA, she said softly, and switched to English as if that were a kind of courtesy. He is steady. He is. She looked like someone measuring a bridge she might have to cross someday and then looked away. Let's work, she said and returned to the table. The afternoon turned to law and money regions in which my presence matters less as a surgeon and more as a person who has listened to much and forgotten nothing important. A clause that would have played badly in Milan began as an assumption and ended as a choice. A sentence in French that had no subject acquired one in Spanish, and thus a responsible party. When people thanked me, I declined being thanked and wrote down what needed writing. Dinner that evening was small and earned. The restaurant near the Arc de Triomphe had the kind of light that tells a room to be quiet without policing it. Victor placed Ethan between the Italians and did not sit beside him, which was wise. He placed me where I could watch without appearing to. Claudia arrived late, took the last seat, and carried on a conversation about alloys with a specificity that suggested she kept old parts in her desk like talismans. On the sidewalk afterward, Ethan and I walked without speaking, a useful habit we perfected when he was a child learning to ride a bicycle near traffic. Paris amplified the quiet rather than filling it. We stopped on a bridge where the river moved with the confidence of anything that knows its grade. You were good in there, he said finally. You were better, I said. He shook his head, different. Back at the hotel, I took my notebook out of my bag and moved 3 items to the next day, a phrase for Helena to teach her team a reminder to send Dr. Patel an article about vestibular testing in claustrophobic patients and a note to buy more tea. I slept without dream. The second day closed with signatures no one pushed toward the camera and handshakes that meant work, not friendship. Claudia shook Ethan's hand and held it a fraction longer than necessary. To me, she said only buenas noches and meant it. Victor looked down the line of faces the way a coach reads a roster that has finally arranged itself. He did not congratulate anyone, which made the satisfaction in his eyes read cleaner. We flew back to Chicago in the good exhaustion that follows right-sized exertion. At the baggage carousel, Ethan retrieved my suitcase and balanced it on his, as if it weighed nothing. In the taxi, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, the tendons in his neck, telling me the story of the day without his mouth. The city slid by in segments of glass and brick. Home arrived the way it should, keys, the barely audible click of the lock, the apartment greeting us with the smell of our own detergent. Work resumed with the indifference work should have to travel. At the clinic, a teenager from Puebla who had been losing words found enough of them to ask whether he would be able to play soccer after his seizures were controlled. At the office, Helena's pen scratched yes beside a strategy we had drawn in pencil the week before. Ethan came home after 9 with his tie loosened and the quick steps of someone whose mind was still at a whiteboard. He reheated soup and told me about a young engineer who had discovered an error in a legacy spreadsheet and corrected it without apology. The wind shifted. The lake made different decisions about waves. The elevator learned our hours. In the morning, I passed the hydrangeas I had written on a Paris page and thought of the courtyard where they'd stood. I did not decide what they meant and did not need to. Winter leaned hard on the lake and made the city crystalline. Work held its shape. 3 mornings a week at the clinic, I slid chairs closer to families and turned questions into plans. 2 afternoons a week, I sat with Helena's team and lowered the temperature of rooms that wanted to overheat. On Fridays, I left by 4 and bought bread from a place that wrapped it in paper as if paper could keep warmth from escaping. December brought the company's gala at the Art Institute, the kind of event that understands how to let paintings do most of the talking. Helena found me beside a hopper and said, "Someone would like to meet you." She led me to a tall man with careful hands and a tie that didn't announce itself. Dr. Marcus Rivera, he said, Northwestern. His smile was professional without being practiced. "You're the reason 3 of my fellows suddenly want to talk about speech acts." "I'm a convenient excuse," I said. "We need a clinical advisor for our international program," he answered unfazed. 2 days a week. Case conferences, translational work with visiting surgeons. You'd never touch a scalpel. "I already don't," I said. Then you're ahead, he said, and outlined the work with the economy of someone who respects hours. We made a time to speak in a quieter office, and he moved on through the room with the easy gravity of a person other people trust. Ethan arrived late, tie-crooked eyes alight with the kind of fatigue that comes from building rather than defending. He stood with his colleagues beside a model that kept drawing hands. I watched him refuse to oversell and watched people lean in anyway. On the way out, he asked, "Who was the surgeon?" Helena introduced. I told him. "You'll do it," he said, not as an instruction but as recognition. I said I'd see. By January, Monday afternoons belonged to case review with Dr. Rivera's fellows. I sat at the end of a long table listening to brilliant, tired people explain hard things to one another across languages. I translated only when meaning thinned. A Colombian surgeon thanked me afterward for catching a nuance in a patient's metaphor that would have sent them down the wrong path. "You did it," I said. I just pointed at the road signs. Snow pushed the city into smaller rooms. Ethan kept later hours, and the airspace floor found its cadence budget signed without drama. A test article assembled without a miracle. A young engineer write about a problem no one else had seen. At home, our schedules braided without fuss. Sometimes we ate together, sometimes we set leftovers with notes. He called when delays turned into nights. I texted pictures of soup so he'd know which one was his. In March, letters on Northwestern letterhead made the advisory role official. I put the binder in the drawer with Victor's card and the tape measure. The work fit. Mornings at the clinic retained their familiar urgency. Afternoons at the institute carried a different weight, a course of languages and the steady click of tools reassembled for other hands. Sophia's absence stopped being a subject and turned into a fact. Once after a video call with Madrid, Helena mentioned that Ibarra Aero's marketing team had a new lead who preferred email to slides and fax to flourishes. She didn't say a name. I didn't ask. Spring came late, and then all at once, as if the trees were tired of being sensible, the lake softened. Tourists returned to the museum lions with their paler courage. Work pressed forward. In May, a visiting surgeon from Dakar told a story at Grand Rounds about a generator that kept dying during craniotomies. The whole room leaned in and then leaned back out together. I walked home through Grant Park and thought about everything that can go right when people hold their jobs correctly. Summer taught us our neighborhood. I learned which vendor sold tomatoes that tasted like July and which bus driver wouldn't wait if you ran. Ethan learned the names of the night maintenance crew and brought them coffee when deadlines stretched. When he made a presentation to a skeptical board member, he practiced the opening with me at the kitchen table, then left the cards behind and spoke without them. That night, he came in grinning and kicked off his shoes like a boy. Autumn returned with a sharper edge. At the clinic, an elderly man from Veracruz brought me tamales wrapped in a towel and told me he could sleep again. At the institute, a fellow from Lyon wrote me a note after a case went well. Merci de ne pas traduire quand ce n'est pas nécessaire. Thank you for not translating when it isn't necessary. I kept the note in my bag until the paper softened. On a clear evening in November, I gave a guest talk to medical students about communicating risk without smuggling in fear. Dr. Rivera stood at the back with his arms folded and a look that read like attention, not assessment. Afterward, a student asked how to learn to hear the thing beneath the thing. Listen longer than is polite, I said. And remember, people don't speak in paragraphs. They wrote it down as if it were new. Ethan met me for dinner at a small place that had more light than tables. They signed off on the Barcelona line, he said, setting his phone face down as if it were a skittish animal. Production starts in January. He didn't add more. He didn't need to. The first snow fell the next day, the soft kind that makes everyone's gait a little humbler. I left the clinic with a scarf I didn't own in March. On the train home, 2 teenagers argued in Spanish about a spilled drink and made up before my stop. My apartment smelled like onions and thyme. A stack of case summaries waited on the table beside a bowl of pears. I hung my coat, washed my hands, and put a pot on the stove. Ethan came in later than usual, hair damp with snow shoulders, unstrung in a way that said the day had asked for everything and he'd given it. He leaned in the doorway while the soup thickened and told me about an intern who'd found a mistake indexed under MISC. He laughed when I lifted a spoon to his mouth and judged it needed more salt. He added some and apologized to the soup out of habit. We now ate at the small table by the window. The city worked through its winter duties outside. Plows steam from grates, the brief flare of sirens that were not for us. When we finished, he carried the bowls to the sink and looked out at the blue cast on the snow. Good, he said, and meant the room the food the day the sum. I set the kettle on for tea and opened the window an inch to let in air that knew where it had come from. The apartment held its quiet. In the hallway, the elevator hummed someone else home. The lake would freeze and unfreeze on its own schedule. The soup pot cooled on the stove. I turned off the light above the sink and let the room keep what it could. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.